I wanted to, first of all, big thank you to Liz and her vision for this second version of BOLD, and I feel very honored to be here and have the chance to share a little bit about the Dance for Parkinson's program, which many of you may already be familiar with, but also to prompt some perhaps discussion and questions about things that I'm currently looking at and exploring. I do want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on where we meet and our elders past, present, and emerging. I live and work on Yagara and Turrbal land in Brisbane, and my home is in Missoula, Montana, in the beautiful Rocky Mountains. And so I think that that's an important part of my story. And even though I'm living and working in Australia, I still feel that that's my home in the States. So our program with Dance for Parkinson's is affiliated with the Dance for PD program in the United States. And just hearkening back to the fact that that program started in about 2001 with the Martial Arts Dance Group. And that from the beginning it has been this artistic endeavor, that the arts and the dance are really at the center of the program and the initiative, working in collaboration with community. And it's been really amazing to see how, as the program grows and continues to connect with communities around the world, that stays very true at the core of the program. So in my work here in Australia, I've become very involved in the arts and health and well-being discussion. And so today I want to talk a little bit about balancing on what sometimes feels like a tightrope between the arts, health, and well-being. So if we look at Parkinson's is a disease that affects people worldwide, and that in Australia, 1 in 308 people are living with Parkinson's, and 37 new cases are diagnosed every day. So Parkinson's disease is a condition that will touch many Australians in some way. And currently there is no cure. And while there's great importance on continuing to research and do trials for potential cures, there's also the aspect of how do people continue to live and what's the quality of life of living with debilitating disease such as Parkinson's. So that's where the Dance for Parkinson's program fits in. So for people living with Parkinson's disease, rigorous dance classes led by trained professional teaching artists are internationally recognized and acknowledged as an important, beneficial, and welcome addition to the portfolio of recognized movement-based therapeutic interventions that are supported by published research. By approaching movement as dance students, not as patients, persons with Parkinson's can focus on PD-specific concerns like mobility, balance, rhythm and flexibility in an enjoyable social and communal environment. So I'll just go through a little bit about the program. And so the idea is that we're sharing our expertise as dancers with the Parkinson's community, that it focuses on an aesthetic, creative experience that strives to highlight what can be accomplished rather than what cannot. And it brings dance to people who might not otherwise have the opportunity to take place in these kinds of activities. In addition to the physical and emotional benefits, it's really about the community, the social aspects. And the idea that in our classes, everybody is welcome. Those who are newly diagnosed with PD, other people who come in wheelchairs and walkers, family members, carers, that we create inclusive communities together. It is fun and joyful. So we try to get a good workout, but also have a lot of fun. So as people who are already connected to dance, none of this is probably new information to you. We look at the idea of dancing together and this ongoing focus on improving quality of life. So in the past 6 years, since we've been doing Dance for Parkinson's classes here in Australia, we've seen that there are now over 35 classes happening across Australia, which on one hand is wonderful to see it growing. On the other hand, there's still such a need, if there are people living in rural communities, to have greater access to different activities, exercise-based programs or cultural activities if you're living with Parkinson's disease. So from some of these dance classes, there have been other things that have started, like singing groups, boxing groups, painting groups. So to create a rich portfolio of different activities. We are now also working to collaborate with organizations in Korea, in China, Malaysia, and we'll be doing the first teacher training in Japan in June. So looking at connecting into the Asia Pacific, as well as working with dancers and community members in New Zealand. So really looking at what can happen here in the Asia Pacific region, connected to Australia, but also with sort of including and starting to work with different approaches to dance and health and well-being. One thing that's really exciting that we're working on now is this idea of the local connected to the international. So in connection to the upcoming World Parkinson's Congress in Japan, there's been an invitation from some of the dancers in the States to create dances, crane dances, based on the idea of the birds or paper cranes. So dancers around the world have been creating short videos of their dances to be submitted for the World Parkinson's Congress that will be part of this big virtual community of dance. And it's been quite fun because they also sent us paper cranes, and so we've been then sharing the paper cranes across with the communities in Australia, and to see that wonderful idea of how one local class can be connected to the nation, but then also connected to what is happening internationally. So I think that it's really great to have so many people here who are working in Dance for Parkinson's or teaching Dance for Parkinson's classes, such as Paige was able to speak about this morning. Here's an example of a class that we did at the Sydney Opera House, working with the Michael Clark Company, dancing to David Bowie music, which was great fun. We have a wonderful collaboration with the Queensland Ballet up in Brisbane, connecting into company repertoire, which has been really lovely and ongoing from the beginning. Or here in Canberra, the fabulous dancers at the Belconnen and Tuggerannon Art Centre, who are very accomplished performers as well, who we'll get to see tomorrow. So lots of great things happening here. Now, there is growing body or research about the benefits of dance for aging, and specifically for Parkinson's disease. However, I do find that there's this constant balancing act that I'm engaged in between the dialogue or the language of arts and science, or arts and health and well-being. So one of the things that's happened recently is that despite there being this existing body of research around dance for Parkinson's, that in some contexts there's an increasing call for evidence-based research specifically for the Dance for Parkinson's community. So this might focus on what dance style is the best for improving gait, or what kind of music or tempo of music is best for Parkinson's disease. On the other end of the spectrum, you have other researchers or choreographers exploring the idea of improvisation or performance, or different ways of appreciating what might be viewed as Parkinsonian movement. So there's a full spectrum of work that's being done in the Parkinson's community. So I'm very interested in and very supportive of research, but I'm increasingly becoming aware of how it's framed, how it's approached, and how I might be participating in that. So, for example, I am a big advocate of dance, and sometimes I really, really want to share the value of that. So I might find myself slipping into the language that is talking about the physical benefits, talking very clearly about improvements in gait and decreases in rigidity and facial masking. But then I'm challenging myself to also reflect on the aspects of artistry, creativity, the aesthetic components. Because over time, what we're seeing is that sometimes those things are what are become most long-lasting benefits for many of the participants. So I think when I'm thinking about the importance of research and how it's being encouraged to continually look at how can there both be the quantitative research, which is important, but also the qualitative research, but also encouraging for there to be other ways of exploring how what's happening in a Dance for Parkinson's class can be measured. So really involving the expertise of dancers to look at new ways of proving or demonstrating what's happening in a Dance for Parkinson's class that can be translated across outside of the artistic communities. So I'm going to now take it a little bit bigger to sort of think about arts and health and well-being in this discussion that's happening in different places around the world. And that there's been some really interesting work happening in the UK. And I just like this sort of sentence, this quote about this idea from the all-party parliamentary groups on arts, health, and well-being inquiry. Some interesting documents that have come out of that. But this idea, we offer a challenge to habitual thinking and ask for new collaborations to be formed across conventional boundaries. So looking at, in the arts, health, and well-being context, how that might happen. And recently, just recently, in the city of Manchester, they made a declaration, which was a vision statement how Greater Manchester becomes a city region where arts and culture are seen as central to the well-being of its diverse residents and workforce, a global leader exemplifying the very best in arts, health, and social change. So I thought that was a really interesting vision for a city region to really look at placing arts and health so directly connected to culture and well-being. Just sort of returning to this idea of sort of how things are measured in research. Researcher Sarah Houston has done a longitudinal study of the Dance for Parkinson's program in the UK, focusing on the English National Ballet. And one of the things in talking with her is that she said over the course of time she was surprised because some of the words that started coming out were things like people commenting about how they felt beautiful, or this idea of gracefulness, or sort of more what she said is old-fashioned words about talking about dance. And this idea of how this artistic activity, as she says, an artistic activity that helps to restructure biological disruption away from the uncertainty and symbolic significance that Parkinson's brings. Feeling lovely can be the result. This outcome may not be measurable, but is still important to note if dance is to stake its claim as a meaningful social activity. Beauty is not an incidental aesthetic frippery, rather it is important to individuals who value dancing as a key to formulating a different relationship with their disabling condition. So this idea of how it relates to identity, or as one of the participants said, dancing like this is helping me to get Mr. Parkinson's out of the driving seat of my life. So this is actually a participant from Sydney, but a quote from a participant in the UK. So again, sort of making those connections. So when I think about how this affects the kind of work that we're doing here in Australia and that I'm interested in exploring, one of the things that has led me to be involved in is an arts and health network group in Queensland. And that's given me an opportunity to connect with people who are doing arts and health practice in hospitals, so clinical settings, people who are doing music practice, theater, visual arts, poetry, community-based programs. And so to really engage in this dialogue about this movement that is happening, and it's active and it's only going to continue to grow, and what role do we want to play? How do we want to shape that dialogue and that discourse in different ways? And last year we were able to come up, work on a vision and action plan for the state of Queensland, which was really exciting because we started to feel very proud about all the great stuff that is happening up in Queensland and the ability to share that and make what's happening more visible. But there were also a lot of questions that came up. And one of the biggest questions that came up was around terminology. And this has to do with what is being used in the field, how does that relate to different practices. So for example, just one very specific one that connects to Dance for Parkinson's would be the use of the phrase dance therapy. So just recently I had a discussion with a PhD researcher who's looking specifically at Dance for Parkinson's from a physiotherapy perspective. And we were discussing that in much of the research, if it's a physical therapy intervention, often it is talked about as a dance therapeutic intervention, but it is not what people in a dance therapy practice would consider dance therapy. But yet a lot of the research doesn't really sort of spell out those differences. What is the difference in practice between a community-based dance class, a physically based dance intervention, or what might be considered a dance therapy approach. So this is not just in the Dance for Parkinson's context, but this kind of these kinds of questions are happening across arts and health practice. So what I am interested in is also this idea of a bit of a call to action, I would say. Not that I'm sure everyone here is already busy enough, but as a dance activist, this idea that when I look at my fellow colleagues who I'm inspired by and working in these areas, that we are experiencing these ideas of collaboration, community, and building positive relationships. We know how to do that. And also the idea that we can be real leaders in this idea of arts, health, and well-being, and that the work that we're doing informs the growth of quality of life initiatives across Australia. And that I'm really looking at how we can advocate to continue to have dancers' voices, dancers' embodiment, and many of these discussions that are happening around arts, health, and well-being in Australia. So I'm happy to discuss more at other points, but thank you very much. Oh, sure, yeah. I'm happy to answer questions or be challenged or...
What a call to arms, Erica.
I wanted to, first of all, big thank you to Liz and her vision for this second